Welcome back, Chappelle. All right, welcome back to your very first flip post your first test, right? So a lot of y'all did actually really, really well. I was really super impressed. I had 300s in D period. It was absolutely mind-blowing how well some kids did in both classes, right? I had several 98s and a lot of really good scores. So looks like actually y'all had the ability to kind of like remember a bunch of stuff post-IDA. I guess I'm not that bad at this. Now, the big thing though, if for some of y'all that feel like you didn't do as well as you wanted to on that last test or on this test that we just took, this is going to be your chance to really bounce back, right? So we're now getting into your second unit that we actually talk about in Western Civ, and it is one of my favorite ones to teach, right? So like I love talking about this unit. I find it fascinating. I find these people very rich and culturally amazing and very ahead of their time, even though they were such an ancient people. And they also serve as this like rock into the puddle and that created ripples that existed throughout time. And it was the answer to why we do so many things to this day, the way that we do them, is because of these people. So go ahead and create a nice new fresh piece of paper in your notes where we're going to start this next unit, right? And you're just going to go ahead and put there up at the top, Unit 2. Ancient Rome, right? We are now getting into the ancient Romans, right? Ancient Rome, whenever you start talking off about it, the very first thing you have to identify is where the heck is it, right? So whenever we start talking about Rome, the first thing you need to remember is that ancient Rome is actually located in the country of modern-day Italy, right? So Rome is actually the capital to this day of modern-day Italy, the city of Rome, right? Except ancient Rome is going to grow to be a giant empire that is going to span most of the continent of modern-day Europe, even into North Africa, right? And it actually is Italy right here, and it would grow and expand, and then Greece, what we just got done talking about, it's like right over here, like right over next to the ocean. You're also, this unit, going to be having your very first map quiz, so you can actually locate the differences between Italy and Greece and things like that. That'll be coming up soon. I'll let you know exactly when that's going to happen. But Rome started out in the modern-day country of Italy, which of course looks like a big boot kicking like Sicily. So anyway, this right here is Italy, and whenever we talk about like Rome, we have to talk about the beginnings of Rome, right? Where is Rome coming from? Where is it going? Where did it start? Why did it start in Italy? Etc. So the big thing you got to understand first is get into Italian geography, right? First and foremost, Italy is 100 miles wide and 700 miles long, right? So it's actually, in the grand scheme of things, not that big, right? It's got about the same square mileage as the state of Louisiana, right? So Louisiana is about the size of modern-day Italy. Well, Louisiana and like Arkansas, right? So really interestingly enough as well, though, is that this geography of this place in Italy, the Italian peninsula, is going to be dramatically different from that of the Greeks. It's going to be like the exact opposite of that of the Greeks. Whereas the Greeks were like super mountainous and had no farmland, it was super bad, and they had to resort to trade and geographic isolation, blah, 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 blah. The Italians, on the other hand, the land was much less rugged. So it was actually much more flat and easier to traverse, making travel much more easier. However, they didn't have very many natural harbors, like at all, right? So you have to understand that the coastline of Italy is covered with cliffs, right? So if you actually take a second and look right here, we'll go ahead and Google the Italian coast, right? So if you actually look at the Italian coastline, Italy is covered in these different cliffs, right? So like actually it makes it just go wham, and there's not really natural harbors, right? Now this is going to be a really big deal for them because early Romans are not going to resort to trade nearly as much as the Greeks did, who had tons of natural harbors and access to the Aegean Sea, whereas instead the Romans are actually going to much more focus on their agricultural products, their own city-state, their own area, and the peoples that live on the actual like terrestrial area of Italy, right? Also though, militarily speaking, how could this be really good for you? That's exactly right, Caroline. It defends you from attack from outside invaders, right? These cliffs make it not only hard for you to communicate with others, but it makes it very hard for people to come at you, right? So, but this is kind of what the coastline of Italy looks like. And this actual city right here is called Cinque Terre. I've been there, no big deal. It's absolutely beautiful. It looks like a big old box of crayons. Now, anyway, going into it though, so as you can see, not many natural harbors, mostly cliffs. But some of you are probably also thinking to yourself, well, did they trade at all? Well, they actually did, but most of their trade actually took place on land, right? Not by sea. They actually traded with some of the other groups that's popped up on Italy as well, because the Romans weren't alone. The Romans were not the only groups of people on Italy, but there's a reason why we're talking about the Romans. We're not talking about the Samnites, or we're not talking about the Etruscans all the time, or we're not talking about the other members of like the different Italian tribes. We're not talking about them because the Romans are going to grow to be the most powerful of them all, right? But there were still people there. So the Romans traded over the Italian peninsula with others rather than actually having to resort to the sea and things like that. So the Greeks also are going to use the few natural harbors that the Romans actually had access to. Just so you know, really, really quickly, ancient Rome is going to span the following years, 753 BC to 476 AD, right? 753 BC is actually very, very relevant and kind of like more current in time than we were talking about the Greeks, right? When we started talking about the Greeks, we talked about the Minoans who popped up what we believe in like 3500 BC, right? So they were there for a lot longer and creating civilizations, the Greeks were anyway. And then the Archaic period in Greece started around 800 BC, right when the Romans first had their founding, right? They just became a village, a small area, right when the Greeks are starting to like have Athens and Sparta rise to power. So the Greeks are kind of an older civilization than the Romans were. And because of this, the Greeks had the ability to go off and colonize other areas, right? So they actually colonized huge amounts of territory that would eventually become Roman, right? So here's Italy right there. Rome would have been located right here. But you see all this blue right here? Those are Greek colonies, right? Greek colonies. And one of the biggest ones was down here on Sicily. It was called Syracuse. So any area that actually had decent natural harbors in Italy was already taken up by the Greeks, right? However, big thing about it is it's really okay because the early Romans didn't need to trade as much as the ancient Greeks did. The Greeks had to trade. They needed access to cereals and grains and other things like that because their farmland was so terrible, whereas the farmland in Italy is fantastic. Right? So, and they're actually much more of a river valley civilization like the ones we talked about before. The big reason why Italian dirt and geography and like their farmland is so much better than the Greeks is due to the fact that there's heavy amounts of two substances inside the dirt in Italy, right? One of them being volcanic ash. There are several volcanoes in Italy, both live and inactive, right? But over time, with the eruptions and different eruptions of some of these volcanoes, like Mount Vesuvius, for example, when it erupts down near Naples and kills the entire city-state of Pompeii, which is actually south of ancient Rome. There's also there's another one that's like the Calzone or the Stromboli, the Stromboli volcano. So when these volcanoes would erupt, though, they would spew this ash into the air, and volcanic ash happens to be very good for the dirt, right? So actually, the Italians had a really, really easy time farming because of that volcanic ash. Also, because of silt, right? Because this river that they actually lived right next to, and they actually founded Rome on the banks of this river, would flood seasonally every single year, leaving behind this gunk or stuff called silt. And silt is like tiny bits of rock and mud that kind of act like fertilizer for the dirt. So that makes their soil fantastic, right? And also, Italy is protected territorially by two different mountain ranges. So not only, think about this for a second, the Romans have great farmland, don't need to trade with anybody nearly as much. They are protected by the Italian coast. There are no natural harbors so that people can't come and attack them, right? So because of these cliffs. Also, they have two mountain ranges that keep them safe. Yeah, for example, they're actually right here. So this is one of the mountain ranges up in northern Italy that kept Rome safe from attack from the north. These are called the Alps. And then there's another mountain range that goes down the middle of Italy called the Apennines, right? And the Apennines are actually going to end up having a road that cuts through them called the Apennine Way, which actually becomes very, very important a little bit later on. But it's the Apennines, the ones that run north to south, and the Alps are the ones up in the north, right? For example, the Alps also exist in Switzerland, parts of southern France, and things like that. So yeah, these two mountain ranges kept them very, very safe, and fledgling Rome was able to get very, very strong very quickly and actually grow and create an empire that's going to actually pop up a little bit later on. And another big thing that you have to understand is that Rome is considered, what do you want? What? No, it is too late. I am already midway through it. I have to do it. I will only let you in to say hello to my flip. If you can tell me the two brothers that apparently founded Rome. The two brothers that founded Rome, what were their names?
We got it.
Go say hello.
I said it before you.
It's already recorded.
Oh,
You
you
can
took my answer.
Because I'm about to tell the Romulus and Remus myth.
I just want
Hey,
to shout out to Kirsten. Love you, girl.
I love it.
She
Kirsten
she
is in my
always-
honor. She's never going to see this.
Oh, really?
Hey, academic.
Get out. No, I have to record now.
Really hard.
They just took it. No,
Study.
Bye. All right, so jumping back on what just happened anyway, the only reason those girls were allowed to come in is because Corinne Lamia actually remembered the answer to this question, right? So there's a very, very intense myth that actually happened that is considered the founding of Rome myth, right? So like we said before, all myths have like grains of truth to them, right? Little tiny elements of truth. Now, really quick though, these men, these two guys that we're about to talk about in this myth, might have actually existed. We're not positive, right? One of them might have, both of them might have. Things probably didn't play out the way that they did. But we do know that one of these men probably started the founding of Rome. And a way to kind of record their history and translate that over time is they actually made it into a myth. So it would be easier to like kind of transfer that story without people having to know how to read or write. So what I'm going to tell you is now this story about these two boys right here who apparently founded Rome, okay? So you don't need to actually like sit down and take notes on every single little thing I'm saying. But you do need to write down key things, like their names and stuff like that. So here's what apparently happened, right? Because I'm not putting all this stuff on there. But you need to listen very carefully. It's a very, very important part to this unit. So here goes the founding myth of Rome. Now apparently in Italy, not where Rome is now, there was a city-state called Alba Longa, which actually means long hill, right? So apparently there was this little city called Alba Longa, and they had a very, very benevolent, very, very good king, right? And his name was like Numitor. His name was Numitor, and he was a very good king. And he had a daughter, right? And his daughter's name was Rhea, right? And his daughter eventually is going to tell him that one day, like, Father, I'm going to give birth to great sons that are going to follow you up into prosperity, and you are actually going to be like followed by by great men that are going to be birthed for me, right? Well, what ends up happening though in the background is their grandfather, these like two kids, they actually, well, the kids aren't born yet. So anyway, but what happens is Numitor gets overthrown by his brother, right? And his brother's name is Amulus, right? So Amulus ends up overthrowing Numitor, and what ends up happening though is he takes Rhea, Numitor's daughter, and says, you're going to go live and be a Vestal virgin. Right? So, and a Vestal virgin are these people in ancient Rome, these women that had to swear a vow of celibacy to actually make it so they couldn't ever get married and could never have kids and stuff like that, and they had to keep a very certain fire burning all the time, right? So it's called the fire of the Vestal virgins, right? Or the Vesta fire. So the big thing about it, though, is she gets sent away by her uncle who has now overthrown her father, right? Now, her father's still alive, though, okay? So has overthrown her father, and she has now been sent away to become a Vestal virgin, so she'll never be able to give birth to those children that are going to follow her father and be great kings and whatnot. Well, what ends up happening, though, is apparently a god comes to her at night, and it's Ares, right? Ares, the god of war, or to the Romans, Mars, right? So it comes to her, and she ends up getting pregnant, and she gives birth to these two twin boys, right? These two twin boys right here, and their names are the following. This is very, very important. Romulus, R-O-M-U-L-U-S, and Remus, R-E-E-M-U-S, right? Romulus and Remus, okay? Romulus and Remus, what Corinne remembered, their names are very, very important, are going to be the founders of Rome. Because, remember, Amulus sent her away, and she ends up giving birth anyway to half-god children, right? Two twin boys. And so what ends up happening, though, is Amulus hears that she has given birth to Romulus and Remus, and he commands one of his soldiers to take the babies, put them in a basket, or not put them in a basket, and throw them into the Tiber River and drown them, right? She was like, I want them drowned, I want them dead, I don't want these kids around, okay? And so the soldiers take the babies away, and at the very last minute, they were like, I don't have the heart to kill these babies, I can't drown these babies. So they put them in a basket and send them down the river. And the river ends up guiding the basket down and then ends up pushing the basket onto the coast of the river, or on the coast, onto the banks of the river. And then out of nowhere, this animal shows up. And this symbol right here is still considered a very prevalent city symbol of Rome, right? Literally, FC Roma, the football club, the actual soccer club that represents Rome, has this image as their shield on their jerseys, on their kits, right? So this animal shows up and saves these babies, apparently, and her name was Lupa, right? Lupa is a she-wolf, right? A female wolf that saves the babies and literally feeds them and lets them feed off of her so the babies can stay alive, right? A shepherd then comes along, saves the two children, and they stay alive, but they have no idea who they are, right? They're babies. Romulus and Remus have no clue that they're apparently this prophecy that's supposed to take over and help their grandfather out, right? And one day their grandfather actually sees Romulus and Remus in a marketplace, and he's like, wait a minute, I think you're my grandsons. And what ends up happening is they reunite with their grandfather, they go forward, they overthrow their uncle, they reinstall their grandfather as the leader of Alba Longa, and their prophecy has been foretold. But the thing about it was they eventually talked to their grandfather, and they're like, Grandfather, we do not want to rule Alba Longa, though. we want to create our own city. We want to create our own civilization, our own place, right? And that place is going to be called a city that they haven't named yet. But they decide when they were young, they're older men, when they're about like in their late teens, right? They're going to strike out and they're going to find a place to create their own city, make their own empire. That's going to be even better out Belongo. Their grandfather respects it and lets them go, right? So they go off and they start wandering and they decide that they are going to settle in this one particular area on the banks of the Tiber River at the base of 7 different hills, right? So there are 7 different hills that Rome is founded upon. We'll get to that here in a second. And Romulus and Remus start an argument, and they're like, well, what hill are we going to settle on, right? And they end up having a contest to see which birds, how many, like, a hill has more birds on it or something like that. And it's literally called, like, bird watching or whatever. And Romulus's hill has more birds on it. But then these two boys get into an argument, right? Get into an argument over how Rome was going to be ruled, okay? The big thing is Romulus wanted it to be a monarchy. And Remus did not want it to be a monarchy. So Romulus apparently then decided to stab his brother to death. So Romulus stabbed Remus, and Romulus became the very first king of Rome. Hence why it's called Rome, the city of Romulus, right? So very, 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 very good. That is the myth of how Rome was founded. Very important elements there. Make sure you remember them. But that's probably not what happened. Now, the real settlers of Rome was more than likely these people known as the Latins, right? So the Latins are going to be the very first true settlers of Rome. And they actually were just a very simple nomadic people, and they made houses that looked like this. This, like, construction is actually called wattle and daub, right? Wattle and daub, just like simple kind of clay little huts and stuff. Now, the big thing about it, though, is Romulus might have been a real person. We're not positive. Remus might have been a very real person. We're not positive. But we know they're probably not half Aries. They probably didn't get saved by a wolf. They probably wouldn't have this crazy origin story where they helped their grandfather overthrow their uncle, right? So, but the big thing is that did happen is that a small group of people broke off from what they're known as the Latins, right? So the Latins were another group of individuals that lived to the east of where Rome was founded, right? And a small group of them broke off and then founded what was known as Rome. And that is why Romans spoke Latin, because that is the language of the people that they came from originally, right? And that we now call the city-state that they founded Rome, right? And the other big things, though, is that Rome was founded on a hill. We do know that part of the myth to be very, very particularly, like, accurate, right? Rome was founded on a hill called Palatine Hill, overlooking a very, very important river, the Tiber River. The Tiber River is the same river the babies were put into in the myth, right, in the basket, and floated down, right? The Tiber River floods annually every single year, giving life-enriching and soil-enriching silt into the dirt, making it very, very easy to farm. But the other big thing that you need to know is that there are apparently 7 other hills, just like in the story, that Rome was then founded upon later on. You're not going to need to memorize the hills. We'll talk about a few of them at different times. There's Capitoline Hill. There's Palatine Hill. Palatine Hill is where Romulus actually built his hut and his, like, palace. It's where the word palace comes from, is Palatine Hill, right? So the settlement, though, grew to cover those 7 different hills to protect from catastrophic flooding. And this is what Rome looked like when it actually expanded over those 7 hills, right? You had, like, all these different ones right here: Esquian Hill, Salian Hill, Palatine Hill, Palatine Hill. I've been to them, just saying. And then you had this area down here in the middle, which is called the Forum, which is like their version of the Agora, but we'll talk about that a little bit later on. Capitoline Hill being here as well, right? And so, of course, there is the Tiber River snaking through Rome, okay? And here is my wife doing a handstand on what I believe is Esquiline Hill, right? So that is actually Esquiline Hill that she's doing a handstand on. Look at her. Oh, that's, yeah, there she is. All right, so now, like, and then this is actually in Rome when her and I went, and then this is a picture of the Tiber River that I took when I was actually in Rome. And the Tiber River is very, very important as well. So really quick, though, but apparently the Romans weren't alone. So history could have gone dramatically different if something really, really interesting did not happen to those early Romans. So like we said, Romulus, probably a real person, right? We don't know about Remus. There's 1,000 different other stories and versions of that story. Apparently there's this one guy named, like, Octillus, who told this story where it's like, oh, Remus actually lived to be very, very old, but just let his brother be in charge, and blah, 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 blah. But there is a very important thing that does actually happen, right? Now, whether it be the Sabines or whoever you ask or whatever, there were these people very close by to the Romans known as the Etruscans, right? And the Etruscans are going to be the very, very first people that actually interact with the Romans, causing a lot of rifts and the creation of a lot of different things that become instinctively Roman. So the Etruscans were north of the city of Rome, right? And we know that those people, these Etruscans, were a little bit more culturally advanced than the early Romans, right? If Romulus was real or not, if Remus was real or not, it's not kind of our concern right now, but we do know that the Romans interacted with these people, right? These Etruscan people that had showed up and made a large city-state to their northern area. Well, what ends up happening, though, is, as you can tell by looking at the Etruscans, the Etruscans look like they're super Greek, right? Don't they look like super Greek? They have laurel wreaths on their heads. They're wearing these tunics. They're growing what looks like to be olives. They're playing a flute. Like, so why do they look so Greek? Well, the reason why is cultural diffusion. The Etruscans apparently traded with the Greeks, right? They traded with the Greeks and shared their culture with the Greeks, and the Greeks shared it with them, right? And there are instinctively things that are very, very Etruscan. Beehives apparently are very, very Etruscan, and many, many other things. And like apparently this like way of reading a lamb liver to like speak with the gods. We're not going to talk about that right now. But apparently they traded with the Greeks, and the things that they adopted with the Greeks are actually going to affect their expansion. And so since the Etruscans showed up, they actually end up coming in and they take over Rome for actually quite some time. They came up with the walls around Rome, and they actually ruled over Rome from about 753 to about 509 BC. So for almost 250 years, they were actually in charge of Rome when they expanded. And because of this, the Etruscans actually culturally diffused some of their ideas into the Romans. The Romans are going to eventually expel the Etruscans in a very, very large war. And when they become their own state, though, some Etruscan things have been left behind. And I need you to write these three things down, okay? So the Etruscans showed the Romans how to do several things. One being their dress, right? So the toga, the thing that is instinctively known as the toga that the upper classes of Rome would end up wearing, was actually an Etruscan thing that they showed the Romans how to make when they controlled them, right? Another big thing is the alphabet, the Greek-style alphabet, the phonetic alphabet, which is going to be the construction of like this new style alphabet that they're going to use, and their Latin language is going to use this alphabet that they borrowed from the Etruscans as well. And then the last thing is this thing, the fasces, right? That right there is a fasces. It's very, very important. It's spelled F-A-S-C-E-S. Fasces, right? So fasces is a symbol for ruling power that the Etruscans created, right? It's super, super important. You need to underline it about 18 times and circle it about 1,000 times, right? The fasces tries to demonstrate in Etruscan culture the joining of the people and their ruling authority. The ruling authority being the axe and the people being the wooden rods that apparently surround this central rod. And what would happen is Etruscan kings would actually have one of these in front of them, and they would be marched out in front of them to demonstrate or be a symbol of their authority and their ruling power, right? And some of you are like, why is that thing so important? Well, the big thing about the fasces is it's actually a prevalent like symbol that we use in our government today. So I'm going to show you fasces in the Senate. All right, so there are two golden fasces that sit on the backs of our Senate Hall in the United States of America. So if you go to the Senate building, the Capitol building inside of the United States of America, you will actually look on the back wall and you see two golden fasces that actually exist on that back wall. The fasces is a very, very big thing. It's all over our government buildings. It's all over our different stuff. And it's also surrounded by a laurel wreath, trying to show that our government, which is a democratic republic, is the elements of Greek and Roman governments combined together, right? The fasces representing the Roman elements of the government and the laurel wreath representing the Greek elements of the government, right? So that is a really important thing. The fasces becomes a huge deal, and the Romans took that from the Etruscans. They expelled the Etruscans, and they kept it around, and it became a very, very all-important symbol of rulership and power, right? So those three things they actually borrowed from the Etruscans. So if you actually really, really look at this, jot this down, Roman culture is technically a combination of three different peoples, right? It's Latin, Etruscan, and Greek. Write that down. Latin, Etruscan, and Greek. Those are the three cultures that combined together to create what was going to be culturally a brand new place called ancient Rome. Now, the other big thing, though, is very important, and we're going to start with it tomorrow. We're going to start talking about the Roman conquest of Italy itself. So I'll see you guys then. Y'all have a good one.